Robert was 18 years old and lived in a comfortable house in the north of England, the third son of a tired father who had made his small fortune as a merchant and wanted, above all things, for his youngest boy to want nothing. His mother sewed his shirts. His sister brought him warm bread in the mornings. His father sat him down one autumn evening and told him, kindly and with a great effort at patience, that a man could spend his whole life in one town and never regret it, that the sea killed young men who thought they had understood it, and that comfort was not a small thing, though the young could rarely see so. Robert listened. He loved his father. He said nothing. And a year later, when a friend at the port invited him to sail to London on his father's small ship, Robert stepped onto the deck with a small bag and one long look back at the town he had grown up in, and he did not go home for 28 years. The first voyage taught him nothing. A storm broke the ship apart within a week, and Robert, wet and shaking, was pulled aboard a rescue vessel and delivered ashore with a small purse of money and the strong advice of every man on the boat to return to his father immediately. He did not. He went to London instead, where he found another captain heading for the coast of Africa, and he sailed again. He was 20 when the pirates caught him. Their ship was faster than his, and their crew larger, and they took him alive because that was worth more than killing him. He spent the next 2 years as the slave of a wealthy merchant in a hot foreign city whose language he never fully learned, carrying water and cleaning boats and sleeping on a thin mat in a corner of a house that was not his. In those 2 years, he grew from a boy into a man. He learned what it felt like to be no one, and he learned that no one is a thing a person can survive being, but only barely, and only for so long. He escaped in a small fishing boat with a young boy whose kindness in the master's house had kept him alive through the first winter of his captivity. They rowed for 11 days along the coast, hiding from ships and drinking rainwater, until a Portuguese vessel picked them up and carried them to Brazil. Robert wept when they took him aboard. He had not wept in 2 years. In Brazil, he did what a sensible man does. He bought a small piece of land. He grew sugar cane. He learned Portuguese slowly from the mouths of workers and priests. He built a warm house, and for 4 years he lived quietly and prosperously, and if he had stayed there, this story would have ended in a small, warm way in a small, warm town. But at 26, restless again in the way he had been restless at 18, Robert agreed to sail with a group of neighboring plantation owners on a small ship bound for Africa. They wanted laborers for their farms. Robert wanted, though he did not admit it even to himself, one more journey. The storm caught them 9 days out. It was worse than the storm of his first voyage. The mast broke. The ship split. Robert was thrown into the sea and knew, in the moment before the water closed over his head, that this was the end his father had warned him about, and he was sorry at last that he had not listened. He woke on a beach. He did not know at first how he had reached it. He did not know what island this was or which sea. He was alone, except for a dog that had somehow survived from the ship and had come ashore beside him and now lay at his feet, watching him with the small, careful eyes of an animal that has decided a person is worth staying for. Robert put his hand on the dog's head. It was the first warm thing he had felt in days. He was 26 years old, and he was going to live on that island for 28 years. He did not know that yet. In the first weeks, he assumed a ship would find him. He watched the horizon every morning. No ship came. In the second month, he swam out to the wrecked hulk of his old vessel, which had drifted onto a sandbar not far from shore, and he carried back on small wooden rafts everything he could salvage. Nails, tools, guns, barrels of grain, rope, a carpenter's chest, a small book that had been the ship's Bible, waterlogged but readable. He worked for weeks in trip after trip until the wreck finally broke apart in a second storm and disappeared beneath the water. After that, he was alone with what he had. He built a shelter on a small hill above the beach. He learned to make bread, badly at first, from a corn he had accidentally spilled and which had grown wild in a patch of ground behind his tent. He learned to make pottery from the island's clay. He learned to keep goats, catching them one by one and building a small pen where they eventually bred and gave him milk. He learned to make a calendar by cutting notches into a wooden post so that he would not lose count of the days, because he had come to understand that losing count of the days was the first step to losing his mind. He read the Bible. He had not been a religious man in England. On the island alone, he read it slowly in the evenings, and he prayed sometimes, and he came to feel, though he could not have explained how, that he was not entirely alone even when he was entirely alone. Years passed. He grew a long beard. His clothes wore out and he sewed new ones from goatskin. He caught a parrot and taught it to say his name so that he would sometimes hear his own name spoken aloud by another voice. He walked the island end to end and knew every rock and stream. He built a second, hidden home on the far side of the island for the days when he wanted to feel further from the sea. In his 15th year on the island, walking along the beach one morning, he saw a single human footprint in the wet sand. He did not sleep for 3 nights. He did not eat for 2 days. His hands would not stop shaking. For 15 years, he had believed himself to be the only human being on that island. In one moment, he understood that this was not, and had perhaps never been, true. It took him almost a year to piece together the story. There were people from another island somewhere across the water who came to his island occasionally to hold feasts. He came one terrible morning upon the remains of one of these feasts, and he understood that the people who came ate other people, and that they brought their prisoners here to kill them. He hid himself more carefully after that. He built a hidden cave. He kept his guns cleaned. He waited. In his 25th year on the island, he saw the visitors arrive on the beach. From behind the rocks, he watched them dance around their fire. He watched them prepare to kill their prisoners. And when one of the prisoners, a young man of perhaps 20, broke free and ran into the trees, Robert did what he had prepared himself for years to do. He came out from his hiding place. He shot 2 of the pursuers. He waved the running man toward him. And when the young man understood at last that Robert did not intend to hurt him, he fell at Robert's feet and put his forehead on the ground in a way that Robert would never forget for the rest of his life. He called the young man Friday for the day on which they had met. Friday learned English quickly. He was kind. He was clever. He laughed easily. He listened warmly. Robert, who had not spoken to another human being in 25 years, taught Friday everything he could think to teach him. And Friday taught Robert things about the island and its plants and its animals that Robert had not known in a quarter of a century of living there. They became, in the way that 2 men in an impossible situation sometimes become, brothers. They lived together for 3 more years. Then, one morning, a ship anchored off the island. Robert watched it from the rocks above the beach, and he saw that a group of mutineers were rowing their captain ashore to abandon him on the sand. Robert and Friday, moving carefully, freed the captain and helped him take back his ship from the men who had tried to steal it. In return, the captain offered Robert something Robert had almost stopped believing he would ever be offered again: passage home. Robert stood on the deck of the ship as the island grew smaller behind him. He was 54 years old. He had left home at 19. He had lived on that beach for 28 years. Friday stood beside him. The dog was long dead. The parrot had grown old and gentle. The goats belonged now to the island. England, when he reached it, was not the England he had left. His father had died. His mother had died. His brothers had scattered. Only his sister remained in a small house in the same town, and when he knocked on her door, she stared at him for a long moment before she understood, and then she cried into his coat as though he had been a ghost who had come back to explain himself at last. He did not travel again. He lived quietly in the same town where he had grown up, and he wrote down, slowly in a small book, the story of the island and the years he had spent on it, so that his sister's children and his sister's grandchildren would know what he had learned there. He wrote only one sentence at the end. I ran, he wrote, so that I could come home. If I had known at 19 that home was where I would end, I would have wasted less of my life running from it. But perhaps I could not have arrived unless I had first left. He closed the book. He sat by the small window. He watched the small town go on about its small, warm evening, and he understood